The history of the presidency of South Africa is unique from most African countries because there have been so many presidents in different eras of the country, while being fairly new in democracy. However, history is what we'll look at today on Green Click. By the way, be a friend and subscribe, click the notification button to get alerts, and like the video to help us make more videos you love about our amazing continent. Let's dive in. So the history of the presidency can be separated into 4 eras, dating back to the 1800s. We have the Monarchs from 1910 to 1961, which consisted of leaders King George V, King Edward VIII, King George VI, and Queen Elizabeth II. These monarchs were represented by governor-generals who were appointed by the monarchs with indefinite terms. Basically, if the king or queen liked you, you would exercise as the head of South Africa until the monarchy switched leadership. That is why all 11 governor-generals served varied terms in the office. In 1961, however, the state president replaced the governor-general and monarch, edging closer to democracy. These state presidents were in office for an extent of 7 years. The first state president was actually the last governor-general of the country. His name was C.R. Swart, also known as Blackie, because of his last name translating to English as Black. The next state president unfortunately did not make it to the office as he suffered a stroke before taking to the office. He was replaced by acting head of state Tom Nod, who was in the office not up to a full year. Jim Fouch stepped in and is currently the longest single-term president of South Africa, with 7 years in the office. Jan de Klerk was an interim president in the office for a mere 10 days after Fouch's resignation. He is the father of F.W. de Klerk. More on him later. Nico Diedrichs was elected and lasted 3 years in office as he died of a heart attack. Marius Vioen came in as acting president for 50 days before John Vorster became president-elect. John Vorster was the overseer of the trial that sent Nelson Mandela to prison. In short, he was a bad man that was pro-apartheid. He eventually was involved in the South African version of the Watergate scandal and retired in disgrace before he could reach a year in the office. Marius Vioen was welcomed back in as acting president, but this time he was able to secure a term as an actual president. He was the last president before the 1983 constitution that changed the powers of the heads of state. As the changes came to the constitution in 1983, P.W. Botha became the first true head of state, serving for 4 years. He was also the last prime minister prior to becoming president. Botha was confusing because on one hand he legalized interracial marriages and allowed Nelson Mandela to be contacted. But then he was brutal when it came to enforcing violence to those who were against apartheid. He also never regretted his apartheid rule, but then said he never saw blacks as inferior. He eventually retired after 4+ years in the office, however. Chris Hunis was an interim president for 55 days when Botha fell ill. F.W. de Klerk, the son of a previous president, became president and wound up being in the office for 5 years. De Klerk was the president that worked to dismantle the apartheid system and introduced the freedom for anyone to vote in South Africa. It was not easy though, as he received some resistance, especially from the right-wing white minority. However, it came to fruition as he oversaw the next elections that brought in Nelson Mandela as president. Nelson Mandela, a global icon and a leader against apartheid, finally came into power in 1994. One notable thing he did was oversee the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a 2-year hearing of crimes committed during apartheid. He also had to rebuild a nation that lived on segregation for countless years, which means millions of people were without electricity, jobs, and healthcare. Though he was slightly successful in fixing these problems, some others were difficult to control, like crime and HIV. Thabo Mbeki stepped in after Mandela's resignation. Being a no-nonsense president, Mbeki believed African problems should only be solved by Africans. He, however, also dealt with HIV and electricity problems while in power. He was also the first president to deal with xenophobia, as he was criticized over his lack of attention to the problem brewing between South African and Zimbabwean locals. He improved the economy and unemployment rate in the country at the time of his resignation. His resignation with 9 months left on his second term happened because of his interference of the prosecution of Jacob Zuma, a long-standing frenemy who actually took over the presidential seat from Mbeki. However, before Zuma could step in, Ivy Matsepe Kasaburi was president for 14 hours. Galima Motlanthe was acting president for 226 days and was regarded as a clone of Mbeki in regards to the HIV problems and his stance on Robert Mugabe. Jacob Zuma is largely a controversial president, first because he was convicted for bribery and accused of rape. He also released an individual related to his bribery conviction 28 days into their sentence. He was booed at Mandela's funeral. He allegedly cost the country over $80 billion due to corruption and poor decisions. Apparently, he tipped his wife to run for presidency to secure his political hold on the country. However, she lost to the current president. Zuma was pressured to step down, which he finally did in 2018. He is currently making appearances in courts as he faces charges looming prior to his presidency. Cyril Ramaphosa is the current president, being in office for 2 years and counting. He was instrumental during South Africa's transition to democracy back in the 90s, as he is a businessman. He is focused mainly on the economy of the country through tourism and youth employment. Again, a president known for his business acumen would be criticized as looking mainly for his financial gain with his current position. He is currently leading South Africa during the era of COVID-19 and has done a great job facing the outbreak as opposed to the current president of the United States. So in total, there have been over 30 leaders, one president who never made the office, 2 that were forced to resign, and 1 female president who was in office for 14 hours. Definitely, this is a very condensed version of the history of the South African presidency. We hope you learned something new watching this video, as it shows the country's landmarks in racism and segregation, while also highlighting the presence of corruption in power, which is prevalent in Africa. If you'd like to be informed when we roll out new videos, give us a like to help us with the YouTube algorithm. Share this with a friend and drop a comment if you disagree or would like to request a video. Till then, brothers and sisters, have an awesome day.